The sun crept over the dense jungle hills as the Red Cross trucks rumbled slowly toward Ailing Point Camp. Their tires carved deep tracks in the wet, rutted clay, kicking up fog from the morning dew that hung low over the scarred landscape. Ailing Point wasn't much to look at, a hasty assembly of canvas tents, wooden crates, and rusting oil drums perched on a muddy rise above a mosquito-choked river. But to the men lying inside, it was the final hope between agony and oblivion. Just beyond the main gate, a grim convoy arrived, 17 Japanese prisoners of war, fresh from a skirmish on a crumbling Pacific outpost. Corporal Hiroshi Namatame lay still among them, half-conscious, slumped against a broken ration crate. His skin was pallid, his pulse thready. His abdomen had festered for days with an untreated gunshot wound, pus leaking through the rotted field dressing. Around him, his fellow prisoners moaned or stared blankly ahead. One had lost 3 fingers to shrapnel. Another bore a rope of blackened infection curling up his leg like ivy. The stench of blood, infection, and jungle rot trailed behind them like a ghost. The guards, though tense, didn't prod or shout. The prisoners weren't running anywhere. Inside the medical tent, Dr. Leonard Fisk pulled off his gloves with a sigh, sweat pooling at the base of his spine. His hands smelled of iodine and fear. He had just finished treating a Marine with trench foot so severe his skin peeled like paper. Beyond the flap, groans filled the air. American wounded waited in rows of cots, some wrapped in bloodied sheets, others shaking with fever. The camp was holding on by sheer will and dwindling supplies. They were days overdue for antibiotics and morphine. Protocol was clear. Americans first, prisoners after. But as the Red Cross convoy arrived, Fisk scanned the prisoners' condition and made a decision that defied policy but honored humanity. He turned to his team of medics, still washing their instruments. "Start with the prisoners," he said, his voice firm. "Triage based on critical condition, not flag." Sergeant Willis blinked. "Sir." "That one's not making it an hour without drainage and fluids," Fisk said, nodding to Hiroshi, whose head lolled slightly, eyes fluttering. "The Americans can hold a little longer." The reaction came fast. Private Keller, watching from a cot nearby, spat on the ground. His leg was still stiff from a femur break wrapped in soggy gauze. "We bleed red, but they shot first," he grumbled. Another Marine raised an eyebrow but said nothing. But the medics moved. Not with speed, but with grim purpose. They rolled Hiroshi onto a gurney, ignoring the flinch of his muscles as their latex fingers brushed his side. They cut away his uniform, caked in blood and mud, and began cleaning the wound. Saline, alcohol, and gauze. The tools of mercy. No ceremony, no forgiveness. Just stitches and silence. Hiroshi felt the burn first, then the cold, then a sharpness like a knife being unsheathed inside his gut. He blinked hard. The ceiling blurred above him, as did the faces around him. Where was he? Had the war ended? Was this the American trick his commander warned of? Rumors had always circulated in the barracks that American medics poisoned wounds, that they used prisoners to test disease. And yet, the hands that worked on him were careful. One sponge gently dabbed his forehead. Another pressed cool bandages against his side. He turned his head weakly and glimpsed the American doctor for the first time. Dr. Fisk wasn't smiling. He looked exhausted, angry even, but not at Hiroshi. Another wave of pain crested through Hiroshi's ribs, but this time he did not cry out. He simply watched, bewildered as the doctor leaned over, checking his vitals, then moved to the next soldier. Around him, the groans of the wounded, American and Japanese, blended into a strange chorus. No gunfire, no shouting, just the slow, steady rhythm of treatment. Somewhere nearby, a Marine muttered a curse. Another turned his face away. Tension crackled in the air, sharp as the scent of bleach. But no one stopped the work. And Hiroshi, dazed, sweating, whispered to no one in particular, perhaps to himself, perhaps to the ghosts of dead comrades. They're cleaning my wounds before theirs. Why? The air inside Field Command HQ hung thick with the metallic scent of burnt wire and wet canvas. Colonel Thomas Greaves sat at a folding desk beneath a hanging kerosene lantern, its hiss battling the steady moan of wind outside. In front of him, the camp's wireless unit blinked erratically, an open panel revealing a tangle of soldered cables and melted connectors. The static had been worsening for days, worsened by the encircling limestone ridges of Ailing Point, nature's own jamming system. Greaves muttered a curse under his breath as another garbled message came through. Repeat. Stockpile withheld until confirmation of triage, standby, over. And then, silence. The directive from Central Command had been simple on paper. No use of critical medical supplies for enemy combatants unless surplus is confirmed. That single line, typed in cold carbon ink weeks ago, now lay taped to the side of the wireless terminal, faded, curling at the corners, and ignored. Greaves stared at it, then glanced at the scribbled inventory logs on his clipboard. They had 23 units of morphine left. 11 were already allocated. A dozen remained in the lockbox. More American soldiers were arriving each day, some walking wounded, others unconscious on stretchers. He hesitated, then scribbled a vague report back to command. Triage protocol underway. Supply usage in accordance with field necessity. Surplus pending. He signed it with a shaky hand. If pressed later, he could claim ambiguity. If reprimanded, he could say the radios failed, and they had. Outside the HQ tent, Sergeant Paul Redding paced near the latrine trench, chewing on the tip of a pencil. The lanky adjutant had spent the morning reviewing medical records and grew increasingly frustrated. "Sir," he said sharply when he returned, "Private Hurst has been vomiting blood since last night. He hasn't received even a saline drip. Meanwhile, that Japanese sniper, the one with the chest wound, is getting morphine and sugar water." His voice tightened with a mix of indignation and fear. "The men are watching. They're saying, 'We've lost the script.'" Greaves rubbed his temple, gesturing toward the reports. "We don't have the script anymore. We're improvising." Back in the medical tents, Dr. Leonard Fisk was finishing a second round of dressing changes. His hands were red from iodine and trembled from exhaustion. He'd been up for 19 hours. His team, 6 medics, 1 nurse, and a civilian field technician had treated 21 soldiers and 8 prisoners since sunrise. They hadn't eaten. They hadn't stopped. They just moved from cot to cot like ghosts, haunted by the idea of choosing who suffered more. Private Keller's 4th bag hung limp by his cot, a plastic husk swaying slightly in the breeze. He blinked up at the ceiling, barely lucid, fever burning through his bandaged thigh. Across the aisle, Corporal Hiroshi Namatame had just been rewrapped and given half a morphine ampule for a rib fracture so severe his breathing came in wet, rattled clicks. A medic named Dawson watched the 2 young men from opposite sides of the war breathe in nearly perfect rhythm. The nurse, Lieutenant Rachel Monroe, approached Fisk with a file. "Sir, I need to file an official objection," she said, voice tight. "We are in violation of triage code Delta Echo. I'm putting it in writing. She wasn't wrong. She wasn't cruel. She was scared of what would happen if the brass found out, scared of what the men would say if another Marine died while an enemy lay sedated." Fisk nodded. "File it. But don't stop what you're doing." She hesitated. "Sir, the Japanese boy who got that morphine, he could be the one who put a bullet through Keller's leg." "I know," Fisk replied quietly, "but he's also the only one here who said thank you." As evening fell, the mess tent grew quieter than usual. Normally, the post-mission chatter would fill the space, jokes, rumors, crude songs. Tonight, only the clinking of tin utensils and the scraping of boots on gravel marked time. No one mentioned the rumors that had begun to spread, that Keller's condition was worsening, that prisoners were getting better care, that triage meant nothing anymore. In the back of the supply tent, Two medics argued over saline usage until a third intervened. "We're not doing this," he snapped. "We're not letting this place turn into a scoreboard." They all fell silent. War had rules, but in Ailing Point the rules were unraveling faster than their radios could transmit. Colonel Greaves stood by the infirmary later that night, watching shadows flicker across the canvas walls. The silhouettes inside were strange, an American soldier holding a flashlight while a Japanese prisoner retched into a basin. A medic rinsing both their linens in the same bucket. It was not the war he had trained for. It wasn't the war anyone wrote manuals about. A mosquito buzzed near his ear, and he slapped it absently. Then he turned and walked away, back to his tent, where the radio hissed with the sound of nothing at all. Inside, the morphine supply was now down to 6 units. Hiroshi's bandages were fresh, but Keller's IV bag ran dry by noon. Neither man knew how close they were to becoming headlines in a war report. The radio failed, but the conscience worked. It was nearly midnight when Dr. Leonard Fisk sat alone at the edge of the field tent, the coarse canvas above him fluttering slightly with the wind that rolled down from the jungle hills. A single kerosene lantern flickered beside him, casting a wavering yellow light that made the ink on the paper tremble like the thoughts in his head. The low hum of insects and distant coughs from wounded soldiers filled the dark, broken only by the occasional rasp of someone turning in their cot. Fisk stared at the page, pen in hand, struggling to decide whether he was writing a report, a confession, or a plea for understanding. He addressed the letter to Brigadier General Martin Weston, but there was no certainty it would ever reach him. The wireless had failed again that evening, static and shrill bursts of noise drowning out any attempt at contact. Fisk knew that the official protocol called for treating American wounded first, a policy drilled into every field unit since the campaign began. But he had made a different choice, a human one, and now he needed to account for it. "Sir," he began, his pen carving slowly into the page, "I must speak plainly. Today we administered aid to Japanese prisoners ahead of several of our own. I gave the order. I did so not out of rebellion, nor disrespect for our men, but because the Japanese were dying at a rate that no triage sheet could justify." He paused, hearing the faint groan of a Marine not far from the surgical tent. His thoughts shifted to Private Keller, who had lain in pain for over a day, his leg splinted but not yet properly treated. Keller had said little, but Fisk remembered the look in his eyes when the Japanese prisoners were wheeled past his cot. Not hatred. Something colder, a disappointment that couldn't quite find words. And yet, Keller had not complained when the bandages were changed late. He had simply turned away, biting back whatever he was feeling. Fisk's hand moved again. Among the prisoners was a boy no older than 16. His wound was infected, and fever had set deep in his lungs. We did what we could. When he opened his eyes, he said, "Thank you," in broken English. I want to believe he meant it. He passed out moments later. The sentence sat there on the page, lifeless, and yet it drained Fisk more than the surgeries he'd performed all day. He had served in France during the last war. He had seen boys with their legs gone, eyes blind from mustard gas, bodies torn apart in trenches where mercy was a luxury no one could afford. But this was different. The enemy now was younger, more desperate, and covered in myths, and he was being asked to choose between healing and punishment. The pushback had started before the bandages were even tied. One corporal accused Fisk of endangering morale. Another nurse had threatened to report him for violating field protocol. But the most unnerving response was silence from the chain of command, from the other doctors, even from the wounded themselves. It was a silence that felt judgmental, uncertain, and strangely afraid. It left Fisk feeling like he had committed an act of betrayal, even as he saved lives. And then there were the moments that didn't fit the regulations. The American soldier, Fisk still didn't know his name, who walked across the muddy space between tents and handed a Japanese prisoner a canteen. No one told him to do it, No one praised him. But Hiroshi Namatame, the prisoner, had taken it with trembling hands and bowed slightly. Fisk had watched from a distance, unsure what stirred in him, pride or dread for what it might cost that soldier later. "I realize this letter may be viewed as disobedience," he continued, "but it is not written in defiance. It is written in the hope that you and others will understand what war does not account for: conscience. We are physicians. We mend what is broken. If that line becomes political, then the wound is no longer on the patient. It is in us." He stopped and leaned back. The lantern hissed softly. Outside, a light rain began to tap on the canvas roof, a gentle percussion that steadied his pulse. Fisk folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope, sealing it with a strip of cloth. He didn't know if it would ever be read, but it was written. Somewhere across the darkened camp, Hiroshi lay awake, his chest rising slowly. He watched the shadows shift on the ceiling above him, trying to understand why he had been saved. Nearby, Keller sat propped on one elbow, looking across the camp at the rows of foreign faces wrapped in the same gauze, breathing the same damp air. Neither man spoke. Neither needed to. "The boy I saved could have been the one who shot at me, but I stitched him anyway." The midday sun hung heavy over Ailing Point Camp, turning the canvas mess tents into sweltering ovens. Inside, the scent of boiled cabbage and canned beef filled the air, mingling with sweat and gun oil. The line of soldiers, American and Japanese alike, stretched from the serving pots to the outer ropes. Some shuffled, some limped, others barely stood. No one spoke much. Corporal Hiroshi Namatame stood with his head slightly bowed, one arm wrapped in fresh gauze, the other cradling a tin mess tray. His eyes flicked to the sides often, not out of paranoia, but a trained instinct. Even unarmed, the Americans outnumbered and outvoiced his fellow prisoners. Every motion was deliberate, respectful, cautious. He had learned quickly: take small steps, speak only when spoken to, and keep your hands visible. Across the tent, laughter erupted, too loud for the setting, too sharp to ignore. Petty Officer Grant Bell leaned on the chow table, a ladle in hand, swinging it like a bayonet. His voice cut through the murmurs. "Hey, look at 'em line up. Bet they think it's a trick. Patch 'em up so we can bleed 'em dry again." The ladle jabbed forward dramatically, as if spearing an invisible enemy. A few Marines nearby chuckled. One barked a short, bitter laugh. Hiroshi flinched ever so slightly. The man's English was fast, but the tone, the mockery, was universal. He froze mid-step. The chow line slowed behind him. Bell didn't stop. What's next? Clean their boots? Maybe hand out medals for best jungle ambush? He grinned, looking around for approval. A few soldiers nodded uncomfortably. Others turned away. The laughter died quickly, replaced by the quiet scrape of utensils on metal trays. From the side of the tent, a stocky figure moved forward. Sergeant Daniel Moretz was not known for raising his voice. He was known for his silence, for the careful way he wrote letters home in tidy cursive, and for how he always took the night watch without being asked. A veteran of Guadalcanal and Bougainville, he had seen more than his share of dead boys, Japanese and American both. He approached without warning. One motion, one grab. Bell was yanked forward by the collar and slammed hard into a tent pole. The mess line froze. "We're not playing that game here," Moretz said flatly. No growl, no shout, just cold steel behind the words. Bell's grin disappeared. His tray clattered to the ground. "You just," he sputtered. "File a report," Moretz muttered and turned away. No one moved, not the cooks, not the guards, not the prisoners. Later that afternoon, the report was indeed filed. Bell walked into the adjutant's post with fire in his eyes and a bruise on his chest. "Assault," he said, unprovoked. The paperwork traveled up the chain slowly but steadily, more a formality than a threat. Still, Dr. Leonard Fisk would later remark how quickly the incident became part of official channels, while so many medical supply requests were still sitting unanswered in a drawer. Hiroshi, meanwhile, returned to the infirmary bunk and sat down without touching his food. When the lights dimmed and the guards took their evening stations, he pulled from beneath his cot a handful of torn rice paper, formerly wrapping from a Red Cross crate. Using the charcoal tip from a burnt twig, he wrote in slow, slanted kanji, "They feed us. They heal us, but still bark like we are dogs." He folded the page carefully and slid it between the seams of his cot under the rusted frame. It was not for anyone to read, not yet, but it helped. Across the tent, Keller watched in silence. The same Marine whose bloodied leg had been splinted days ago now sat with his foot propped up and his fingers twitching with the memory of gunfire. He had once yelled at Hiroshi, cursed him in the universal language of rage, but now he just watched. Dr. Fisk received word of the mess tent incident the next morning. He stood outside his tent with a mug of weak coffee, reading the typed summary with a clenched jaw. Not once did it mention Hiroshi. Not once did it acknowledge why Bell's words had landed like grenades in a quiet trench. Just the facts. Sergeant Moretz reportedly used force on Petty Officer Bell following a verbal altercation in the mess tent. Fisk folded the page and slid it into a folder already too full. These were the cracks in the system. Cracks not from enemy shells, but from inside. Between the policies and the lived reality. Between the official position and the raw mess of human war. There were no directives for what to do when a medic wept over the body of a prisoner. No protocol for kindness that wasn't strategic. And yet, men still made those choices alone, without orders. In the next week, rumors flew. Bell was reassigned to the outer perimeter. Moretz was quietly told to keep a low profile. No punishment, no commendation, just the usual. Let it fade. Let it vanish under new wounds and thicker folders. But for Hiroshi, and for others who had heard the silence after the shove, the message was loud. One man had drawn a line, not in the sand, but in the noise, and it held. They stopped the bleeding, but not the hate. The room stank of sweat and burnt coffee. Inside the prefabricated shack of Outpost Delta 3, a narrow station tucked into the northern highlands 70 miles from Ailing Point, Navy codebreaker Elliot Rains hunched over a battered cipher console. The metal walls rattled faintly with the wind. A single bulb swung overhead, flickering with every gust. He rubbed his eyes. The intercept logs were a mess. Half the frequencies were muddy with atmospheric noise, and the latest reel from the aerial scout teams had arrived 3 hours behind schedule. Still, Rains had a job, scan every burst, line, and whisper for meaning. He wasn't a soldier. He'd been a Latin professor once, before cryptography found him. A quiet man with horn-rimmed glasses and a limp from childhood polio, Rains wasn't built for front lines. But in war, language had become weapon and shield alike. And today, he caught something that made his pulse stop cold. A line of kana, fragmented and faint. Then another. He squinted, translating under his breath, hands moving automatically as he cross-checked a manual filled with evolving code keys. His brow furrowed. Southern detention regions. Status, presumed unrecoverable. Ailing Point, designated PFZ. He froze. PFZ, probable fatality zone. His mind raced. The Japanese High Command, based on its own internal intelligence, believed the prisoners at Ailing Point were already dead. This wasn't just pessimism. It was a strategic assumption. The idea chilled him deeper than the December wind seeping through the hut's seams. Why would they assume that? Had a scout plane seen smoke, or corpses, or nothing at all? Or was it something more profound, something cultural? Rains typed quickly, flagging the intercept with urgent priority. He added a brief note. Japanese command presumes Ailing Point Camp is a death site. Indicates belief that American troops execute POWs by default. Recommend escalation to command. He paused, hesitating over one more sentence, then typed it anyway. "They believe we kill them automatically." He signed it, encrypted it, and pushed the dispatch through the comm line to Pacific Naval Command. 3 days later, the report finally landed on Colonel Thomas Greaves' desk back at Ailing Point. Greaves read the header, then read it again, slower this time. His knuckles whitened on the paper. His first thought wasn't strategy or policy. It was fury, misplaced and muted. Do they really think we're that savage? But his second thought chilled him even more. Maybe that's what we've always let them believe. In silence, he summoned Dr. Leonard Fisk to the command hut. Fisk arrived, still wearing his blood-stained apron, hands freshly scrubbed raw. He looked exhausted, as if every patient, American or Japanese, had peeled a layer off his soul. Greaves handed him the paper. Fisk read it, lips tightening. "PFZ," he said aloud. "They think we're slaughtering them?" "They don't just think it," Greaves said. "They expected it. Planned for it." The two men stood quietly, surrounded by the distant hum of generators and the smell of damp earth. Outside, rain started to fall, soft at first, then steadily pounding on the corrugated roof. Finally, Greaves muttered, "You've done more than mend flesh." Fisk glanced up. "You've rewritten a war myth." Neither man knew the depth of what that intercepted belief truly meant. Neither knew that for years, imperial propaganda had fed its soldiers tales of Americans boiling prisoners, letting guard dogs tear them limb from limb. Surrender, they were told, was worse than death. Even officers had been trained to fire on their own men rather than allow capture. That lie had shaped everything: the suicides on beaches, the refusal to yield, the terrified eyes of every captured conscript. And now, somehow, through saline bags, field gauze, and quiet medical choices, a fracture had formed in that belief. Fiska's team had been treating the Japanese prisoners not as enemies, but as patients. There had been no cameras, no applause, just quiet labor under canvas and mud. The irony was brutal. The American camp most feared to be a death trap was, in fact, the only one offering a kind of mercy. Elsewhere, the truth faltered. The report Raines had forwarded, neatly typed, stamped urgent, was now buried in a backlog of higher priority communiques: supply reroutes, aircraft losses, fuel metrics. The Naval Intelligence Team noted it, filed it, and moved on. No one asked for follow-up. No one issued orders to reinforce Fisk's work or to broadcast it as proof of American honor. No one even thanked the medics. There were no medals, no headlines, no revisions to the standing orders that still put U.S. wounded first. Even Raines, weeks later, received a perfunctory "acknowledged" from his CO, and nothing else. But that didn't mean nothing changed. In the shadows of the war's machinery, a tremor had begun. Somewhere in Tokyo, an analyst would eventually revise the maps. Somewhere in Guam, another camp guard would read the same intercept and hesitate. Somewhere in a hidden barracks, a conscripted boy might whisper, "They say they healed one of ours at Ailing Point." Stories travel differently than orders, and sometimes mercy rewrites what gunfire never could. They thought we'd kill them. Instead, we healed them. By the 6th morning at Ailing Point, the rain had not stopped for 12 hours. It soaked through the canvas tents and pooled under the cots. The air smelled of mildew, iodine, and wet wool. Marines grumbled as they struggled to light cigarettes with damp matches. A few joked that the weather was just another enemy in a war where even sleep had to be fought for. Corporal Hiroshi Namatame stood in formation with the other POWs, his posture stiff but trembling. His body had been recovering, slowly, unevenly, but it wasn't pain that gripped him now. It was something deeper, something he didn't yet have words for. When the American sergeant called roll, Hiroshi tried to answer, but the name caught in his throat. His knees buckled. He fell forward onto the gravel with a dull thud, startling the men beside him. A medic rushed to him, not with a rifle, not with a boot to the ribs, but with a blanket and a whisper of reassurance. They carried Hiroshi back to the medical tent, laid him on a cot, and checked his pulse. Nothing alarming. No fever, no broken stitches. He wasn't dehydrated. His condition was, as the attending corpsman muttered, more inside than outside. Hiroshi drifted in and out of consciousness. In those waking moments, he saw things. Not visions. Memories. Flashes of men in olive drab uniforms, men like the ones here, but screaming, clutching wounds he had caused. He had been a marksman, and a proud one. His father had taught him to shoot at 12. His instructors had praised his discipline, his calm. But now, in this damp tent, those medals felt like anchors around his soul. Every time he blinked, he saw a face. Not a target. A face. He remembered one in particular. A young American. Helmet lopsided. Eyes wide with terror. No weapon in his hands, only a bandage roll. Hiroshi had taken the shot anyway. Clean. Precise. The man had dropped instantly. That was war, he'd told himself. But now, every time he awoke to the sight of American medics cleaning his friend's wounds or gently spooning broth into mouths that had once screamed "Banzai," Hiroshi felt something splinter further. The enemy was not what he had been taught. These men did not feed them lies or bullets. They fed them food. They wrapped their blisters. One even whistled while he worked. A cheerful, tuneless melody that reminded Hiroshi of the way his older brother used to hum while sharpening knives. When Hiroshi finally found the strength to sit up, it was Alan Tripp, an American medic with sandy hair and a tired but honest face, who noticed. "You all right?" Tripp asked, offering him water. Hiroshi hesitated, then took it. After a moment of silence, Tripp added, almost awkwardly, "Did they even have medics on your side?" It wasn't a taunt. It was curiosity. Hiroshi stared at the cup. "We did," he said softly. "But they only helped the officers first." Tripp said nothing after that. He just nodded, as if he understood something he hadn't meant to learn. Outside, the rain drummed harder. Tents sagged under the weight of it. In the mess area, Marines ate quietly. The usual banter had dulled since the incident with Bell in the chow line, and something unspoken hung in the air, an understanding that the war, at least here, had slipped sideways into something else. Not peace, but not quite conflict either. That night, as lightning flashed far off over the hills, Private Keller stirred in his cot. His leg had been rewrapped properly that morning, the infection finally under control. He stared at the ceiling, at the slow drip-drip from the tent's leak. Then he sat up and rummaged through the small tin at the foot of his bed. Dry rations, some old biscuits, and a few water purification tablets he never used. He hesitated, then pulled out one half of a hard biscuit. It was stale, brittle, but edible. Keller limped across the camp, leaning on his crutch. He passed other Marines who raised eyebrows but said nothing. He passed guards who pretended not to notice. When he reached the POW section, a tired sentry nodded and stepped aside. Inside, Hiroshi was awake, staring at the canvas above. The flap opened and Keller stood there in the dim light. No words were exchanged. Keller placed the half-biscuit gently on the edge of Hiroshi's cot and turned to go. Hiroshi stared at it for a long time. He did not eat it right away. He did not cry. But his hand shook when he reached for it. That moment, wordless, simple, did not end the war. It did not erase wounds or undo bullets fired, but it did something rarer. It made space for grace. Back at headquarters, colonels still argued over how to distribute quinine. Majors filed reports about rations, bullets, boots. No one asked what it meant that a U.S. soldier had just fed a man he once might have killed. No one made a memo about what might happen if that gesture repeated, multiplied. But in that forgotten patch of mud and mist, under torn canvas and flickering lanterns, something undeniably human had cracked through the machinery of war. He gave me bread, and I had tried to take his life. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It highlights themes of compassion, humanity, and mercy shown in the midst of war. Its purpose is to raise awareness, provoke reflection, and inspire empathy, understanding, and respect for acts of kindness that transcend conflict.